Everything must change.
Hello. We're back to this changing of consciousness, stretching of your mind, and expanding yourself and your soul. I recorded this song some years ago as I was going through my personal change and adjusting to it. We must continue.
Must change.
That's all of us.
No one stays the same.
No one stays the same. Neither do things.
The young become the old. And mysteries do unfold.
I can't finish it. But anyway, I love it, and I love the consciousness. I actually sang that song a solid year and a half, almost every Sunday, or every other Sunday in our church in Tulsa, before I moved to Chicago. I was singing the song, we'd already gone through this major shift in our own consciousness and our ministry. I was no longer ministering in the building I bought, the 30 acres we own, the 645-acre ranch, the homes on it, the property, my intellectual right, all that was gone. And we were ministering in an Episcopal church downtown Tulsa that opened its doors to us free of charge. And but it was awkward because everything had changed. But I kept singing that song. It just came to me. I couldn't get away from it. And the next thing I knew, change was still changing. And I was leaving Tulsa and moving my family to Chicago. It'll be 5 years ago in May. We're still here. It's still sort of awkward. It's fundamentally shaking, the shifting is. It doesn't always feel easy. Even if it feels right, it still feels awkward. It's like being married to the right person. It can be very awkward in the marriage, even though it's the right marriage or the one destined for you. And the children that come after that, or the job you're on. It's really the right job, but it feels a little awkward as you try to find your space and place through it. That's the way life is. Eating a good meal with good food. It may not even taste as good, but it's good for you nutritionally. There are other things you do as a normal human being all the time that you don't realize how uncomfortable it is. You do realize how uncomfortable it is, and yet it's still right. So you're just wrestling with that consciousness. Well, today, many of you know that Nelson Mandela, a powerful prophetic voice and spirit of change and expanded consciousness, has made his transition from enemy of the state to head of the state, from prisoner to president of the country. He shall continue to impact the human culture for decades to come, as he already has. What a tremendous person. I was just in South Africa last week, just the days leading up to Thanksgiving. I actually went in the Thursday before to eulogize a minister, and I came back then from Johannesburg to Tulsa, Oklahoma, and to be with my parents. And so on television, or CNN, they're running a constant special on him. We're learning things about him we didn't even know. The more you read it and listen, and hear the comments he made, this man always knew in his heart. I'm very inspired by it tonight because, for the last several years, I've been sort of waging my own, forging my own battle to free myself, my own mind from the rigors and tyranny of religion, and have a more expanded relationship with self and soul and divine mind, which many refer to as God. But I watched his resolve. 27 years in prison, and then he becomes president of the very regime, the country that put him there. That's 27 years imprisonment, and I heard him at the Waldorf Astoria. He wasn't yet president, but he was out of prison. My wife and I had gone up. We were sitting with Kevin, what's his name now? The mayor of Sacramento. I was just with him a few weeks ago. Kevin Johnson and Armstrong Williams. We're all sitting at the same table. There are a lot of luminaries there, very important. In fact, I met Bishop Tutu and interviewed him during that particular visit to the Waldorf Astoria in New York, and I went there twice, and I heard him speak, and I remember him taking a long pause right in the middle of his lecture, of his speech. He just stopped, slowly put his hands in his back pocket, pulled out the handkerchief, and just wiped both his eyes very carefully, very slowly, very delicately, like he was pampering a baby. Then took off. We just stood there. The audience sat there the whole time. Seemed like it was 30 minutes, probably only about 3. Puts his handkerchief back in his pocket and then looks straight out at us and says, when I was in prison, I spent hours, several hours a day, chipping away at rocks with the bright South African sun shining in my eyes and reflecting from the white rocks. And it damaged my eyes. That's all he said, and he went right back to his speech. It may have been the most moving moment of the entire encounter. There we were in the Waldorf Astoria in New York City, the room jammed and packed with some of the most important figures in American culture, particularly African American culture. And he adds that he didn't complain about prison. He didn't talk much about that experience. He did share that one tidbit with us and demonstrated that without apology, he had the right to take as much time as he needed to wipe his eyes of the moisture that is a result of the misery that is associated with his divine purpose on this planet. Oh my God. Absolutely powerful. Absolutely extraordinarily powerful. Tremendous in every way. And I hope that, that is living with me, living inside me right now. I can see it just as fresh as if it was. Julian was a baby. I mean, he wasn't even born. Gina was pregnant with Julian. That was 20 years ago, 1993. He became president in 1994. So pretty extraordinary in every way. So, and I was speaking at a conference to over 10,000. I posted this today on my site, and I want to say it to you before I say some other things tonight because he made his transition, and we have so much to talk about. But I was speaking at a conference over 10,000 people a night there in Johannesburg, South Africa, only 3 months before he was released in 1994. In 1990. I remember having the white people, 3,000 or 4,000, to stand and apologize in quote-unquote Christian love for the years of hatred, bigotry, discrimination, and malevolent treatment of and against the native people, of people of color, people of the land, of all hues, coloreds and blacks as they call them in those days. And they did so, some reluctantly, but they did it nonetheless. And then the architects of apartheid, I explained to them, were the members of the Dutch Reformed Church, Christians. And most South Africans knew that and have always had a kind of ambivalence with regard to fundamentalist Christian ideologies because it clashed with many of their moral principles in African Spiritism. The Zulu tribes. A lot of the things Christians taught were unlike the moral conscience and the moral turpitudes of the Zulu and the native African peoples. So there was always this conflict, and there remains that today. That's why there's a move in Africa right now, especially toward inclusion. Many, thousands of them love this whole message. And I hear from them, and I visit them, and they're opening up more and more, and they're passing my book around the country, The Gospel of Inclusion. Anyway, I then had the people of color stand up. And every night that I spoke, there'd be an additional 3,000 black people in from the townships. They would charter these buses in. Ray McCauley, who had the great Rhema church there, the largest church, charismatic church in the country at that time, he would have these buses go out and bring them in the night that I would speak. And so I had all of them to stand and face the white people around them. And I spoke a vow of forgiveness and acceptance and love. And that we would not hold bitterness. We would let the bitterness go and the resentments go and the unforgiveness go. There was a mighty presence there that night. And I asked both groups to vow as a people of faith, to believe for a nonviolent and bloodless transition. And it was pretty tense at that time in the country because we knew that Nelson Mandela was on his way out of prison, and we didn't know we didn't know him. He had not been seen in public or heard in public for 27 years. They had really kept him sequestered from so much. He used to read Angela Mayo. I heard that today. And Marianne Williamson, which I mentioned in my post. I wish I had mentioned Maya Angelou is what I meant to say. A great woman who has influenced Oprah and so many thousands of people and millions, but individuals that she's had counsel with. They've read her books. But Nelson Mandela was reading Maya Angelou works while he was in prison, helping prepare him to preside over the very regime that put him in there. All things really do work together for good. Not only to those who love God, but those God loves. And that's everybody. Everything counts, but your evaluation of it determines how you appreciate or depreciate it. Consciousness, alertness, not alarm, alert, being aware of your surroundings, aware of who you are and aware of who you're not, is so powerful in these days. And again, I was again in Johannesburg last week, and this was really interesting. I went there to eulogize Peter Govender, a wonderful man of God, and his wife, at his wife's, the widow's invitation. He was with the Azusa Fellowship, had been in my home, and my wife was very close to Edith and had flown to South Africa less than a couple of years ago. He loved my music I was playing tonight. Everything it must change. I sent him through Regina this entire CD. It's called Reflections After the Rain, after I'd gone through such a storm in my life, and storms do repeat themselves, but I'd gone through a major shift and a major storm during the shift. And it was several years, just before I came here actually to Chicago, that David Smith, my minister of music for many, many years, produced this for me. But I sent it to him, and he loved it. In fact, the last time I spoke with him on phone was from here. His wife was visiting us. He transitioned, so I went down to visit him, and while I was there, I was driven around by my friend Musi Cindy, whom we met a couple of years ago. Musi's been listening to me preach for 25 years since I used to come to South Africa. Back in 1978 is when I went there the first time. But then I started doing the Rhema annual conferences, and they were huge. 5,000 seat auditorium, I think it was. The last time I was there was 10,000 seated trade center near the airport. And he told me that he used to sit out in the audience along with several other of his comrades and hear me preach. At that time, they wouldn't even let them get close to me or me get close to them. They were ushering me in and out of the building, and I could see all these black people and pastors sitting in a certain area. And I thought afterward they'd bring them back and let me meet and greet and hug their necks. And I wanted so desperately to make direct contact with my people in that land. That was not provided the first trip. I had to protest vociferously to be able to meet these guys. Musi I didn't meet till years after. But anyway, he was in those meetings. He's a very successful businessman now, multimillionaire. And he picked me up from the airport in his Jaguar when he heard I was coming. Brand new Jaguar. Drove me to the airport, checked me in, took care of everything. I went there benevolently to help my sister through this funeral. Not a lot of money involved, none actually, except the purchase of tickets, which we got Delta buddy passes from my friend George Vanette, who accompanied me there. His mother worked for Delta for 40 years, and she's laying now at 93 years old, I think, in a nursing home. She has the kind of seniority that we could fly over there for like $200 or something like that, round trip. So we did that rather than charge the widow. And so we went there with what we had, not a lot. And these are tight times for so many people, even though we're believing, expecting, and you can make a lot of money, but you sometimes spend a lot. So it's a test for a lot of us. But we had a great time. But this guy picks us up, Musi. And I'm thinking the first time I went to South Africa, I was the first African American. It took me 5 years to get into the country. I was the first African American allowed to travel in the country with an integrated team that I oversaw. I was the leader of a multicultural team. I had 2 white women, 1 white man who was my soundman at the time. The girls sang with me. One that played the piano was my secretary at the time, Helen Subberfeld, now Trowbridge. And we went into the country, and it was really tense. I couldn't stay in a hotel downtown unless I stayed on the entire floor by myself, which meant I'd be responsible for all those rooms. And they said, but we're going to elevate you from a black to a colored when you come into the country. That's the language they used in talking to me. I didn't protest. I wanted to get into the country and bring these people with me. The first day we preached at a church pastored by a Pentecostal white man, powerful in his pulpit, a nicely integrated audience, not mostly white, of course, but several blacks. Anyway, we were leaving the restaurant, some nice restaurant downtown where we'd eaten after church, and a black man, burnt in his face and his hands looked gnarled. He came to me with his hand extended to begging for some money. We hadn't had a chance to change our U.S. dollars to the rand, which is the African dollar, South African dollar. So I ran my hands through my pocket. I couldn't bear not to give him something. So I gave him American change. That's all I had. I had no dollars. And that's all. And he wouldn't know what to do with that. He was not an educated person. He would not know how to exchange. It really was no value to him, but I couldn't bear not doing something. Anyway, I poured it in his hand, and this man, the gentleman who was with us, took his ostrich skin briefcase. This was a white man who had just introduced me as a black who can really sing. These black people, instead of black, these blackies can really sing. And my girls got pretty upset because they were not black, but they were insulted for me. And I just said, be calm. You're going to see something you've never experienced yourself in America. Great learning experience. But anyway, we were leaving the hotel, and he takes that. He says, your money is no good to him. And he took his briefcase and hit that man so hard 2 or 3 times until it fell back right in front of us. This is a Christian, tongue-talking, pew-jumping preacher. I just ministered in his church. Altars were packed, people weeping, Holy Ghost all over the place. He was so happy that we came. And now he takes, just randomly, takes his ostrich skin, probably a $1,500 briefcase, unless he got some good deal somewhere, and just strikes the guy in front of us. I burst into tears. And I protested to the gentleman. I said, how dare you do that in front of me and in front of my team? These young women from America. What are you thinking about? Your money was no good for him. I said, well, yours is. And you get out of this car and you give him some money, and I want to see you do it. Or I will protest like all get out and while I'm in this country about you. You never understand. He got out and gave him some rant. Oh my God, that experience. Now, flip the page to 2 weeks ago, 2013. That was like 1978, 79. 2013, I'm riding around in a Jaguar in South Africa. A black man owned it, who's a businessman now, who was impoverished when I was there before. And Nelson Mandela was still in prison. And the country was tense. And I was heartbroken over what I saw. But I knew there'd be a change. I expected a change. I felt it in my soul. I knew what was happening in America could happen there. And I had so many conversations. In fact, when I spoke to Bishop Tutu in New York at that event where Nelson Mandela was speaking as a freed prisoner, but not the president yet, I asked him, did he think we were living any part of Martin Luther King's dream? And of course, he said, absolutely we are. He said he remembered getting a page of the Ebony or a little page of the Jet magazine, and they would pass it around to as many people as could read it. Just one page was like a Bible to them. They saw how the Americans had improved, how the Americans were achieving, how the Americans were getting jobs and education and becoming mayors and sheriffs and leaders. And they held onto the pages of the Ebony magazine, published right here, Johnson Publishing in Chicago, Illinois, and of the Jet magazine. And he said that he knew, he said, when you've come from the background that I've come from, you know that Martin Luther King's life and death was not in vain, and his dream was still alive. I saw it last week, just 1-2 weeks before Nelson Mandela made his transition, and I remember the tension I felt when I had the blacks and whites stand and repent and apologize and vow that there would be no bloodshed. It would be a peaceful transition, and that we Christians, at that time it was my language, should affect, not infect or defect, but affect the climate of the culture and of the country, and that South Africa would prophesy to the continent of Africa, and Africa would prophesy to the world. I was saying that in those days. And I had that, I think, by divine revelation. Well, here I'm riding around in this Jaguar with this same brilliant, evolved young black man from South Africa. And we park at a place on our way to view and take a tour of his mansion, the nicest, largest one in a gated community where blacks only could go and clean houses. He now lives in the finest one in there, looking near the river. He had a couple hundred people come there the Sunday after I left for an open house. Jewish rabbis and Catholic bishops and leaders, and many of the black leaders who have denounced him because he shifted in his consciousness, embraces the gospel of inclusion and expanded consciousness and new thought. And he's a brilliant book. I'm going to be using his book to teach on this program. Anyway, he pulls into a eating place to grab some food for us to eat at his house because his wife is gone, and she asked him to run by and pick that up, and he did. Wow! As soon as we pulled this beautiful Jaguar up, we had already passed 2 white men in South Africa walking down the middle of the street begging. And I said to him, Musi, Musi Cindy is his name. Do you realize what just happened? We just passed two white men begging in the street. You cruise along here with two black men and you're paid for a brand new 2013 Jaguar. I had tears in my eyes. It wasn't a matter of money or extravagance. It was a matter of shift and change in consciousness and in culture. Pain to gain. He's been doing. When we stopped to pick up this food, a gentleman, a fairly handsome, probably in his late 20s or 30s, might have been younger, but he looked older. White guy comes up. He looked intelligent and bright. He didn't look like he was beat down a bit. But he comes to our car with selling some kind of cookies. He said, I was raised in an orphanage. I was homeless. I still am to a certain extent. We raised money for the shelter with these cookies. Would you mind making a donation? He was dressed fairly nice. He was very sincere. And Musi said, I had no rand. We were only there like 3 days. Musi said, no, I don't want your cookies, but here's a donation. He wouldn't take the product, this black man, to this white man in Johannesburg, South Africa, hands him some rand, currency, not change, currency. And I smiled at the guy, and he turns around, and the next car was full of a black family that had driven to the store, and he asked them for money. A bright young man with his white friend got out and scampered into the store. The lady there driving the car gave him something. And it meant more. I guess it seems it meant more to me than to Musi, because I hurt for them in a way that they had sort of gotten used to the pain, but I knew that they could be free. I knew that transition could come. I knew that Mandela, once he got in and I heard him talk, that he was expanded in his consciousness. When I learned that he had been reading Maya Angelou and Marianne Williamson, he actually quoted her in his inaugural speech, acceptance speech as president of the country, and I quoted it all over. I thought it was his original words. He'd been reading Marianne Williamson all the time he was in prison. Her books and Maya Angelou and others had so inspired him. He believed in who he was. His conscience was not just stressed. It was stretched to the level that he became president. Not only president, there is no one person on the planet right now that is comprehensively as admired and respected as Nelson Mandela. Not even the Pope, though he's becoming increasingly more powerful with the changes he's making in the Catholic Church. This is a powerful time to be alive in every way. And though I plan to say a lot of other things, I wanted to talk about Nelson Mandela because he is a great spirit, and I got to experience his South Africa and the South Africa before him, and now the South Africa post-Mandela, and what will happen. It's constantly on the television. Mine's right there. You can't see it, so that's why I keep pointing that way. Constantly on the big screen, talking about Nelson Mandela since he made his transition 10 o'clock this morning, South African time. And South Africa time, and they are 8 hours ahead of us in Central Standard Time. So I've been texting and emailing my friends there in South Africa, and I have many. It's a time of, but they're not weeping; they're rejoicing. They're literally celebrating his life. The people are gathering around the Mandela home, and not a lot of tears. Some, of course, there'll always be tears, but there's this jovial, happy, celebrative mood. And it's mostly among young people who haven't experienced apartheid the way that Nelson Mandela did. These kids have a different mindset. In fact, when I was driving, Musi was driving me through the neighborhood where he now lives in that gated community. He was showing me a lot of beautiful, large homes, but they looked fairly similar in the structure and the bricks and the color and I was saying to myself, well, I hope that he lives in one just a step above. I want him to be a sign in the community. He didn't say one word. He just drove us around several blocks and finally to the one place where there was a river that ran through the neighborhood with beautiful trees and weeping willows. And he didn't tell me it was his house. He just drove me in there. He said, this is our little river. And we were pulling out. He said, and that's where I live. I'd seen this big, beautiful mansion sitting on the corner with all this glass overlooking the pond and the river, the little lake and the swans and the geese and the evergreens along with the weeping willows. And it was park benches and grass. That was his house. Now, that may not mean much to you unless you've been there and seen the way the people lived in those days, and the little I slipped my mind where the little shanties are. They're like they're called shanty towns, and they have metal. Some of them have thatched roofs, and the rain comes right through. Today, in fact, we were leaving there on a Sunday. We drove past a place where tens of thousands lived, and it was about to rain, and nobody seemed upset. There was no running water, no sewage, no electricity, and these little shanty towns, and the people seemed happy and casual. Why? Because they had already seen change, and they knew, and they had evidence that their best was next to come. There was a sense of hope and forward-looking to in South Africa that I don't always see here in America, even though we have an African-American president. And we've made incredible strides among many black folk in this part of the country, particularly here in Chicago. Certain areas don't have a sense of anticipation. They have a sense of hopelessness. That's why the crime and taking matters in their own vigilante is rampant. People have lost hope. But in South Africa, all you feel is hope. And even with the transition of Nelson Mandela, the hope is even larger because the whole world, all eyes are on South Africa. Don't you know? And he represents change. If anybody talks about, it's not just lasting through the struggle, that's powerful. Enduring hardness like a good soldier, going through prison, freedom fighter, all that kind of thing. Freedom fighter, yes. And change. Change, incomparable change, dramatic change. Because he came out of prison to preside over the country. And he only stayed in 5 years, and no African president in recent memory has resigned and retired, I should say, and gotten out in good graces like him. It's just, it's extraordinary. Absolutely extraordinary. So I saw that, I felt it, and I told Lucy that he's a sign. And many others are, like Nelson, because we're in that same frequency. We're in that same energy. New thought, expanded consciousness, my metacostalism, all that I believe is part of the same frequency, in the same fluidity of the same flow, or under the same influence and fluidity and flow. All of that. We're current. We're in the current, and we're current in consciousness. We are aware. We're not having to repeat something. We are having to repent something, which means to rethink something. So Nelson Mandela was a spiritual progressive, and was present in and was a cultural creative. A man named Ray something came up with that terminology, and I like it. I've been using it ever since. So we must embrace it. Nelson Mandela was a spiritual man and had been influenced by the writings of others. Many others who were progressives and who were cultural creatives, and had a profound effect on him. He's not into the traditional models and modalities of religion, but he is in the ancient traditions of spirituality. He's like a guru, like a shaman. And he knew what to do. And he knew what not to do. He knew what to say. In fact, President de Klerk, who followed Botha. Botha was president when I went there, but he followed Botha. After Botha resigned, President de Klerk in South Africa said when he met Nelson Mandela for the first time, he was much taller than he expected, much more handsome and vibrant and gracious and humble. He felt no animosity. He felt no hatred. He was instantly relaxed in his presence. That's what we expect, quote-unquote, Christians to do, which very often these strongest fundamentalists in this country are everything but that. And I'm not just taking a swing at them. I think that we need to change our mentalities about Christ, consciousness, and Christianity. There's a difference. Christianity is a religion built around the concept of Christ, but not the Spirit of Christ. And the Spirit of Christ predates Jesus by millennia. There's always been a, not Christian, but Christ witness or divine witness on the earth through the different men and women who preceded Jesus and taught and were healers and were kingdom builders and who were executed or assassinated and were supposed to have been risen to rise 3 days later. The whole concept of the resurrection in Jesus, that is a mythological repeat of things that happened in the years preceding. That's documented in history. The terminology, the names, Johannes, John, and I'll get into that later on, in one of these lectures, because there's just so much. In fact, some of it, you're not even ready for. I could tell you more, but some of you are not ready for what's out there. But if I really reveal to you of this transition, but I'm going to, and we will continue to do this as long as information remains and the inspiration is there. Jesus is quoted to have said, "Is it not written in your law, I have said ye are gods?" Ye are gods. Jesus said that. Is it not written in your law? I have said ye. He's quoting the Psalms. Ye are gods with a little g. You are divinities, divine mind. You are divine entities. Anything else is an illusion. We were created in the image and likeness of God. Anything else is an illusion. Evolving and involving is who we are and who we are becoming. Very powerful. And I want you to get that in your spirit. It's part of who we are. Nelson Mandela knew his higher consciousness, knew his higher self. And that's what we saw. We didn't see the low, debased, defeated person. We never saw it. He was the son of a tribal chief and had priestly and princely attributes, carried himself with dignity, had a law degree, and rewrote the constitution of the same country that incarcerated him. Look into all of this. He helped rewrite and redefine the Constitution to accommodate a free country of a free democracy. You can call him a socialist, as they call President Obama. Jesus would have been a socialist. That's what the breaking of bread, the multiplying of the bread and fish scenario is. It's about Jesus making sure that everybody gets their fair portion from the one little guy's fish and loaves. They would have called him today a socialist, a communist. Because common unity is community, or communion, common union, communistic. Vladimir Lenin, Karl Marx, they took our concept of communion and created a culture. It became violent. It didn't have the purity of the Christ mind, but it had the essence of it, conceptually. And that's what any thriving culture, that's the way you make sure everybody gets something to eat. Everybody has proper medical care. Everybody has proper insurance and assurance that they're okay. That would release the planet, our country, and the culture of a lot of tension. There's so much tension out there because people are not insured and they're not assured. They're not for sure. They're miserable. They're frightened. They're confused. They're angry. That will continue to proliferate if we don't make the kinds of changes I think that President Obama and obviously President Mandela made. And Obama was in tears talking about him today because this man deeply impacted him. Obama realizes that he's being handled by God or something other than himself. There's no way he would have become president, having only been in the Senate as a freshman senator 4 years. And the next 4 years, he runs for president and wins. Do you know that 4 years earlier, he couldn't find a seat in the Democratic Convention in California? It was so packed. He was a freshman senator, I think, from Illinois. Something like that. I may have the numbers a little bit skewed, but that's kind of the way it was. And then he becomes president. You don't know what's around the corner for you either, do you? Things could change dramatically overnight for you. And for many of you, they are, and they will. Get ready for that. Start expecting it. I've been reading Deepak Chopra's book, The Essential Spontaneous Fulfillment of Desire, the essence of harnessing the infinite power of coincidence. Oh my God, it's a fantastic book. I went to hear him live here in Chicago. There must have been 3,000 people in the auditorium, and there was no music, no band, no fanfare. He just walks out on the stage with a glass, and there's a bottle of water, and a stool. And for 2 solid hours, without a break, we were mesmerized. And now, he talks a little bit monotone. He's not the greatest orator. He has a slight accent, East Indian accent. He's short. He doesn't have commanding presence, or he's not arrogant or hyper. He's just Deepak Chopra. But his spirit and the power and truth in his words, the science, conscience or conscience with knowledge is what that really means. He's a very informed and evolved person. We were transfixed. Listening to him. I looked down and he was getting ready to close, and I thought, my God, we haven't been here 2 hours. Are we getting our money's worth? That's how powerful it was. Anyway, we had VIP tickets, my wife and I, so a book comes along with it. We sat in a special section near him. We were perfect where we wanted to be. I always like to sit in a mezzanine when I'm in theaters, because especially when I go to New York and see the Broadway shows, I don't like to be right on the floor. When I go to concerts and things, I don't want to be right down on the floor looking. I like to be up, looking down, so I don't miss anything. And we were not quite in the mezzanine that high, which I normally sit there in that particular auditorium theater. But we were elevated enough to have a perfect view and be close enough to, I would call the prophet Deepak Chopra. Anyway, he wrote this in the book. On Earth, this is pretty powerful. I talk about the shifting of times and seasons and the alignment of the planets and the new age of Aquarius. On Earth, we feel the effects of the sun and the moon in their rhythmic orbits and energies. On Earth, we humans and all of nature feel the signs and effects of the sun and the moon in their rhythmic orbits and energies. The cycles of the moon play themselves out in our body, instantly correlating with planetary movements. Now, this is a scientist as well as a mystic talking. The gravitational effects of the sun and the moon on the earth cause ocean tides. Now, that's science. That's nature. That's natural. It is happening as we speak. Let me read it again. The gravitational effects of the sun and moon on the earth cause ocean tides. You know, you've heard of high tide and low tide, which also affect our bodies. Now, I'm fascinated by this because when I was a little kid growing up in Southern California, we took field trips out to the ocean. We go to the Scripps Institute of Oceanography, and we saw the big aquarium with the fish in it, and the sea turtles and the sea anemones and the coral. And we actually went out to the tide pools, and physically we would look and find the little sea animals and urchins and plants. And I was always fascinated with the ocean. Of course, I'm Pisces. Sign of the fish. That's the Christian sign as well. I like the ocean. I like to live where we live here in Chicago. We can see Lake Michigan, which looks like an ocean with a horizon, nothing on the horizon but infinity, it seems like. And I used to go as a kid to the what we call Sunset Cliffs in San Diego. I would sometimes actually sneak, I wouldn't say steal, sneak my mother's car and drive out there by myself at sunset and stand there in awe of the ocean and the salty mist blowing into my face. And I'll stand on a tall cliffs and look down and listen to the ocean. I'd even go there dark at night, sometimes after church. A very intimidating moment to go there, but I loved it. I love La Jolla. I always go there when I'm in San Diego. I've taken my kids to the beach and let them swim and play in the high and low tides and walk out the long jet bridges and jetties, they call some of them. And it's just fantastic. So I'm into water. So I was reading this and loving every word of it. After all, he says, millions of years ago, we too were inhabitants of the ocean. Millions of years ago, we evolved. He says, scientifically, they project that we all came first from the stars into the ocean. And when we slithered onto the shore, we brought some of the ocean along with us. That human beings evolved out of the seas. Now, I know that most folk, billions, believe that God created Adam and Eve, and I'm not saying that God didn't, but He could have created Adam and Eve as slugs in the ocean first and evolved. I mean, that's science proves that. The Bible says something else. Science declares knowledge, not myth. Knowledge suggests something else. We've been believing that the earth was 6,000, humankind was 6,000 years old. According to biblical chronology, we are. But according to legitimate science and the intelligent beings of the planet, we believe we're created by God. The earth is millions of years old. The universe has been here for infinite amount of times and will be here. In fact, there's never the statement in your Bible, end of the world, in its proper translation. King James version mistranslates end of the world as from the term end of the aeon or the age. The word aeon in Greek is where we get this word eon. You've heard of the eons of time. It speaks of the end of the age. Jesus says, "Lo, I'm with you to the end of the age." I'm with you always, even to the end of the age. Do you know we've actually ended that age and have entered the age according to the zodiac calendar? Zoe is the Greek word for life. Zao, zoology, animal sentient, nephesh in Hebrew. The soul. We're at the end of an age. An end of an era of time. And we're entering a new one. Nelson Mandela's departure. Soon Billy Graham at the same age, 95's departure. I predict it'll be sooner than we think. Paul Crouch, who he and Billy Graham, as far as Christianity goes, are the two most impacting spirits that have inhabited human bodies because of Billy Graham's voice and Paul Crouch's network, which has had, as far as Christianity goes now, the quote-unquote Christian message has reached millions of people that it couldn't through Billy Graham because he was one man, traveling the world. The TBN, the Trinity Broadcasting Network, is the largest Christian network, and I'm told the largest TV network on the planet, worth billions of dollars. And I helped raise money to open stations all across this country. I started working with Paul Crouch and TBN in 1980. What is that? 30-some years ago, 34 years ago. I was the first African-American regularly hosting the Trinity Broadcasting Live Praise the Lord Club. They had every Sunday. And in those days when I did this show, they were 3 hours long. I often did not know who the guests were and didn't know the guests when they got there. Had to create and produce the show from my seat. Then they went to 2 hours. I still did it then. My first national television exposure after Oral Roberts was TBN. But they really saw me on TBN because I was hosting or I was a guest. I was singing and preaching and all that. I preached at the live revivals before I did Heritage USA with Jim Baker. And I did their camp meetings as well. And then I hosted the show. And then Fred Price and I were the first two nationally broadcasted programs by African-American preachers. He was a teacher. I was more in my Pentecostal preaching style. Did Azusa. TBN aired Azusa live and aired my announcement of my wife's engagement to my wife live on TBN. Millions of people saw it. And then they actually taped we taped our wedding. Paul and Jan asked for it live. Can we tape it? I said, sure you can. And then they aired it. By the time Jen and I got to Hawaii, boarding a plane to go to Lanai, where we spent the second week of our honeymoon, people on that plane said, we just saw, and I didn't even know they'd aired it, we just saw your wedding on, aren't you the couple that were on TBN? It was embarrassing to us. I thought, hope these people don't worry us because we went to a small island, away from the bigger crowds. No one bothered us, but it was a beautiful, beautiful experience. So, I think about Paul Crouch and Oral Roberts, and all these people are gone. They were my heroes. They were imperfect beings without question, but they were being nonetheless. And now Nelson's gone, and we know that Billy Graham will probably soon be gone. T.L. Osborne, some of you may know him. He's the one that said, you see, Carlton, the whole world is saved. They just don't know it. I quoted him and got in all kinds of trouble. He left here last Valentine's Day at 89 years old. R.W. Schambach, just before him, one of my dearest friends, preached my first Azusa conference. He's gone. And, of course, Oral Roberts and Kenneth Hagin are gone. Jerry Falwell's gone. James Kennedy, I spoke in his church, Coral Ridge Presbyterian Church, years ago. Catherine Coleman was one of my mentors. All these people that I had personal contact with and who impacted my life. Pat Robertson is, I think he's in his 80s. He's the last of that group, one of the last. And Morris Cirillo, with whom I preached and did mission to London several years with him. I'm thinking about all this stuff. When somebody transitions, I begin to think of all these kinds of things as I am tonight. So Deepak says the cycles of the moon play themselves out in our bodies, instantly correlating with planetary movements. The gravitational effects of the sun and moon on the earth cause tides, which also affect our bodies physically. After all, millions of years ago, he says, we too were inhabitants of the ocean. Most people don't know that. When we slithered onto the shore, he says, we brought some of the ocean along with us. 80% of our body has the same chemical composition as the ocean we once called home, and still affects us by its tidal pull. We're 80% salt water. That's what human beings are. We're 80% ocean. 100,000 miles of arteries in our bodies. Some of them microscopic. You couldn't see them with the naked eye. Enough to circle the planet 4 times. There's 25,000 miles around the globe. That's what's inside. And in those are coursing and vamping blood. H2O, hemoglobin, water, and some of it's salty. It's amazing. Sweat, it comes out of you, it's a little salty. Urine can be that way. Blood, salty if you taste it. You've got salt water in you. We came from the ocean. It is impossible to separate the wave from the ocean. I've seen waves. My daddy used to take us to Silver Strand Beach in Southern California, just south of San Diego, about 20 miles, 5 miles north of the Tijuana border. We loved to go to the beach. There was a bay side, and there was the ocean side. When we were little, Daddy took us to the bay side, he and Mom, because there were no waves, not big waves there, and we played and splashed, and we would stay there till the sun went down. Some of my fondest memories of my childhood is when we went there. When I saw my dad, who taught himself how to swim, while we watched. He wanted to swim. Most African Americans were afraid of the water and afraid to swim when I was a kid coming up. I remember 2 people drowned in a retention pond that was near where we lived in the country. We had fear of water. But our parents gave us swimming lessons and what have you. Watching my brother swim, I learned how to, and others, I learned how to drive a stick shift, my grandfather's stick shift truck. I dreamed I was driving his truck, and the next day, I asked him to let me try it. And I remember what I did in the dream. And I learned in the dream, I was on the same hill that the service station I worked at was, in my grandfather's truck. I mean, this is amazing. I can tell you a lot of things, but all of this is timing. But anyway, it is impossible to separate the wave from the ocean. It is part of the ocean. When you have waves in your life, it's just part of who you are. Accept them. Ride them out. Watch them in their majestic splendor. I've always admired surfing and surfers. I never did it. I thought that was for white folks when I was a kid coming up. You never saw black surfers. White folks would be out there, rain or shine, cold weather, fog, with their warm suits on. I forget what you call it. But anyway, I'm getting a little older. But they had those black, suits on to keep them warm, to insulate them some. I'll think of it a little bit later. But I thought it was cool that I could, and I have a nephew who lives in, my brother's son who lives in Florida. He teaches young inner city children how to surf. He has a ministry around that. He lost his brother to drugs and drive-by shooting in San Diego, and he created this ministry as a result of it. And he takes these kids off the street, out of the ghettos, and he teaches them trains them how to surf down in South Florida. I'm going to see him in January. My wife and I are going down there. So anyway, you cannot take a bucket, he says, a scoop out a wave and bring it home. You cannot take a bucket, scoop out a wave. You can scoop out water, but you can't scoop out a wave and bring it home. They're all inseparable. They're part of the same thing. When we're beginning to understand the soul, the ocean provides a wonderful analogy. Imagine the ocean as non-local reality, infinity, the field of infinite possibilities. See the ocean, the virtual level of existence that synchronizes everything. See the water. And as we go into the age of Aquarius, there'll be an enunciation, I think, 100... Let me see, what is the statement? About 80% of all living things live in water, live in the ocean. With this age, I'm thinking figuratively that as we come into the age of Aquarius, things that were dormant in the past age of Pisces are going to come alive in you and as you. Water, moisture, mist, mysticism, and new spirituality, a powerful shift in consciousness and enlightenment, evolution and involution, all working together. This is a powerful time to be alive. And again, as I spoke about Nelson Mandela, making his shift, his transition right now before the whole world at 95 years old. You can feel the energy on the planet. A huge spirit left us a few hours ago. One, obviously, God handled and tailored for his generation and for four who know of him. Amazing. Absolutely amazing. Amazing. So, imagine the ocean as non-local, I'm quoting Deepak Chopra, as a non-local reality, the field of infinite possibilities, the virtual level of existence that synchronizes everything. Each of us is like a wave in that ocean. We are created from it, and it makes up the very core of who we are. Just as a wave takes on a specific shape, we too take on intricate patterns of non-local, that's ether or other spacelessness, or spaces. Non-local, that means infinite. I always say ether and other, the ether and the otherness of God. Spacelessness, agelessness, timelessness, reality. This vast, unending ocean of possibility is the essence of everything in the physical world. The ocean represents the non-local, and the wave represents the local, the turmoil, the physical shifting. The two are intimately connected. Once we define the soul as deriving from the non-local or virtual means almost or nearly as described, but not completely. It's you kind of there, but not quite, according to the strict definition. There's no strict definition of the virtual. Okay, it's sort of described and sort of experienced, but it's ethereal, other, ether, ethereal. It's sort of in between. So once we define the soul, and I'm almost finished here, as deriving from the non-local or virtual realm, then our place in the universe becomes remarkably clear. We are both local and non-local. We are finite and infinite. That means without finish. Not definite, infinite. Stop trying to be definite or defined. Just be infinite, without finish, no end, limitless. My God, that's powerful. Huh? We are both local and non-local, and individual pattern emerging from the non-local intelligence. We must recognize that we're not, as you've heard me say and others say before, that we're not just human beings looking for spiritual experiences. We are spirit having an earthly encounter. So we are both local and non-local, an individual pattern emerging from non-local intelligence, which is also part of everyone and everything else, inextricably and inseparably connected to all that is and all there is. My, I'm feeling my old Holy Ghost doodads. My Metacostalism is coming out. So we can think of the soul then as having two parts. The vast, non-local soul exists at the virtual or spirit level. It is powerful, pure, and capable of anything. I'm talking about you now. The personal, local part of the soul exists at the quantum level. The word quantum really comes from the idea of quantity and quality. So the personal, local part of the soul exists at the quantity level, the quantum level. This is what reaches into our daily lives and holds the essence of who we are. It too is powerful, pure, capable of anything. The same unbounded, potential of the infinite spirit also resides in each and every one of us. Our personal soul, which we think of when we think of ourselves, is an outcropping of the eternal soul. I've said a lot, so you're going to have to listen to this over again. And I'll stick with it. I'm quoting the book and making my commentary on it. But it's incredibly powerful, and I want you to be a part of it. I want you, even though you don't understand everything I've said, people don't, and their soul doesn't necessarily remember what's said. They remember how we make them feel. So I'm saying something, you're feeling something, and then you're thinking about what you feel. The universe doesn't judge you by what you feel, but by what you think about what you feel. Experts of the pulpit know how to create a feeling, help create an experience for you, not of them. Because when I talk about the hearing Deepak, I heard a preacher. I was in New York last weekend with Master Prophet E. Bernard Jordan. Sort of a controversial figure in some people's mind, but one of the most accurate prophets I know. I mean, celebrities and business people from all over the world. He's quiet about it. Contact him. I know some I could name and you wouldn't know. They don't make a move without running it past him. He flew my wife and I and our children to New York for a prophetic millionaire conference. One of the speakers was Bob Proctor of The Secret. I think I quoted him earlier. Bob was a brilliant man. He's 80 years old. He's been at this 52 years. Of the people on The Secret, he is the most experienced and the most expressed. For 90 minutes, for 60 minutes. And normally, he gets $50,000 an hour for talking. In fact, when he finished us in New York, he walked out, they drove him out to the airport, and he got on the fastest jet there is, private jet there is, and flew to Los Angeles to speak that night. My wife and I sat transfixed as this man shared. In fact, I joined his stream. I have streaming consciousness, and I'll present it to you next week, how you can join. I'm going to pay $98 a month myself, and I want to enlist maybe another 99 or 100 people who will do that same and have access to his ebooks, his live conference calls, his newsletter. We have access to everything this man is, and he shares his soul. He's an older man. He lacks nothing. He needs nothing. Very wealthy, out of Canada. Did 3 months of high school training and dropped out and started a business that became national, made millions. But he flies all over the world. He had just gotten back from Austria, I think, when he came to us, or someplace over in Europe this weekend. But when you sign up, then I'll get New Dimensions. We'll get $44 from the 98 that you. And if you enlist people, then you'll get $44. You can become, if you found 20 or 30 of your friends to plug into something that's some of the most substantive things out there. I will release this very soon, within the next week. I should have had it ready tonight, but I didn't get all the details done. But I'm getting the links already. I've already signed up. They're communicating with me. And even if you miss one of the live lectures, you can go to the archive and get it later. Now, I'm offering myself free, and I have for a long time, but I need some support. He's smarter than I am, Proctor. He's got all this valuable information, and it's worth paying for. And so I'm going to have the link here on my site soon, and people can join, and who pay $98 a month. That's less than a couple of dollars a day, maybe $3 a day. But it's maybe some of the most valuable money you spend, because Bishop Jordan and Proctor came together and put this package together. And I just want 100 people to stand with me, and you may be one of them. I hope you are. And I'll make that information available to you ASAP. It's irresponsible of me not to have done so tonight. I've been trying to get it all together today. But I'll have it for you before next Thursday when I'm here again live. Okay? But I'm going to put that stuff up. I may actually come back and tape something live, put it on Facebook, and just get it out there and start enrolling people now. I don't care how many. I want a minimum of 100. And then you find 1 or 2 or 10 or 100 of your friends, if you think it's worth their time. And once they go to the site, the Proctor Jordan site, and see what's there, they're going to want to be on this, because just like Deepak Chopra, the stuff I'm reading, and what I read, I share with you. And it's like when you go to a good restaurant, you want to tell your friends about it. You go to a great concert or go see a great movie, you want to tell somebody else about it. And when you read a book, Proctor says the second time, you don't find something you didn't see. You realize yourself in a way you hadn't realized yourself before. You experience yourself differently when you read it the second time, and then the third time, or even the fourth time. He reads Think and Grow Rich like a Bible every day. He reads portions of it. and discovers more of himself. With all his millions and all his success and the decades that he's been doing this, he still reads constantly. And was sharing with us last weekend a book that he was reading on the plane back from Europe, on the private jet coming back from Europe. Amazing, huh? Well, think and grow rich. You want to be rich? Yes, you do. I can answer that for you. Well, no, I just want a little money. No, you want to be rich. You want plenty of money. You want all the money you can find. You want all the success. You want all the rich friends you can find. Because being wealthy is not only owning everything, it's knowing people and people know you who have everything. That's part of wealth in the Jewish sense. So anyway, we'll talk about all this because people are struggling financially. I know what that's like. I know what it is to have plenty. As Paul said, I know what it is to be abased and to have less. He says he found himself to be content. I found myself to be tolerant, but not content, because what you tolerate, you'll never change. I don't want to get content with it and too tolerant of it. I want to have plenty, and I want you to have plenty. I want to be able to give everything I want to give, when I want to give it, to whom I want to give it, the way I want to give it. Whether it's adopting a school or a clinic in Africa or an orphanage in India, whatever is available. You spend your life giving and sharing and changing and meeting the challenge of change, right? That's what we want to do. That's what we should do. And, I'm going to bring this to a close. Okay? I love you. Thank you for your time.
Albert Einstein said,
This is the song,
from the same consciousness
Let It Be. You're not going to be able to hear all of it tonight, okay?
We must see the world anew.
This is a great day. Thank you for your time.
When we apply this quote to
Thank you for your consciousness. I bring this program to a close. See you again next time. Namaste. Much love.
Nor can we
Much
gain a
love.
sense of power
If you care about this program, let me hear from you tonight. Take your bank card, push the donate
Whether our
button,
intention is to change
whether it's $10 or $20 or $200 or more. Give something, okay? Will you do that? Will you support what we're doing and make it known? And be happy to do it, okay?
A simple miracle of water falling
Miracles.
from the sky has been interpreted
Great
in many
days.
ways.
I love you.
by many cultures.
Let me hear from you tonight, right
In
now,
various
or
areas of
today,
the world,
whenever you see
rain
this,
is viewed as
okay?
a nourishing
And I'll tell you more about the
gift
Proctor
given
thing
by
the next time.
well-pleased
Peace and
deities.
blessing. Love you so much.
Rain also is served
Good
as a
night.
symbol of emotional cleansing and